Tammy Lynn Leppert was born to shine. By 18, she had won over 200 beauty pageant crowns and landed roles in Spring Break and Scarface. The cameras loved her, Hollywood beckoned. But in the summer of 1983, something changed. The golden girl from Rockledge, Florida, grew fearful. She guarded her food and drinks. She spoke of danger lurking in shadows. On July 6, 1983, Tammy told her mother she was going to Cocoa Beach with friend Keith Roberts. Hours later, Roberts claimed he dropped her near the glass bank. She was never seen again. Her mother, Linda Curtis, searched for 12 years until her death in 1995. Dental records vanished. Fingerprints disappeared. Critical evidence lost forever. Serial killers Christopher Wilder and John Crutchley became suspects, but nothing stuck. 40 years have passed. The case remains unsolved. But what if the truth was hiding in plain sight all along? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The summer heat of Rockledge, Florida, pressed against the windows of the community center in 1965. Inside, a 3-year-old girl with golden curls stepped onto a makeshift stage. Tammy Lynn Leppert clutched her mother's hand for just a moment before letting go. The spotlight found her face. She smiled with the natural confidence that would define her childhood. Linda Curtis watched from the audience, her heart swelling with pride. This was their first pageant together. It would not be their last. When they announced Tammy as the winner, Linda knew they had discovered something special. The crown was too big for Tammy's head, sliding down over her eyes, but she wore it like she was born for it. The audience laughed and applauded as the tiny girl adjusted her tiara with the poise of a seasoned performer. That first victory was just the beginning. Years blurred together in a cascade of competitions across Central Florida. Local contests became regional ones. Regional competitions elevated to state-level events. Tammy's bedroom gradually transformed into a shrine of success, filled with trophies, sashes, and photographs documenting her rise through the pageant world. Linda managed every detail of their pageant life. She drove hundreds of miles to competitions, sometimes 3 or 4 events per month. She bought custom dresses that cost more than most families spent on groceries. She paid entry fees, coaching fees, and photography fees. She scheduled rehearsals, dance lessons, and vocal training. She watched her daughter bloom under the lights like a flower reaching toward the sunday. The local media took notice early. By the time Tammy turned 10, she had won over 50 contests. The Rockledge newspaper ran a feature story about the Little Miss Everything from their small town. Linda framed the article and hung it in their living room, the first of many media clippings that would eventually cover an entire wall. Neighbors would stop by just to see the collection of awards and read about Tammy's latest victories. But Linda saw more than just a pretty face in her daughter. Tammy possessed an unusual combination of natural beauty, genuine warmth, and fierce determination. She connected with judges not just through her appearance, but through her personality. She could hold conversations with adults twice her age, discussing everything from current events to her dreams for the future. She was articulate, ambitious, and utterly charming. The pageant circuit became their second home. Linda and Tammy traveled throughout Florida, from Miami to Jacksonville, competing against the best young performers in the state. They developed friendships with other pageant families, sharing hotel rooms and makeup tips. Tammy learned to handle pressure with grace, to smile through exhaustion, and to perform even when she did not feel like it. As Tammy entered her teenage years, the pageant world began to change around her. Competitions became more sophisticated, the stakes grew higher. College scholarships and modeling contracts awaited winners of major contests. Linda began to see pageants not just as a hobby, but as a potential career path for her daughter. Tammy's teenage years brought opportunities beyond the pageant stage. Modeling agencies from Miami and Orlando reached out after seeing her photographs in pageant programs. Professional photographers wanted to capture her natural grace and photogenic features. Linda drove her daughter to photo shoots across Central Florida, watching as Tammy transformed in front of the camera with an instinct that could not be taught. The modeling portfolio grew thick with glamour shots, fashion spreads, and commercial work. Tammy had an unusual gift for connecting with the camera lens. She could convey emotion with subtle changes in her expression. She understood lighting instinctively. She took direction well and worked efficiently. Directors and photographers noticed her professionalism and began requesting her specifically for projects. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit world of Florida film and television production. Casting agents started calling. Tammy auditioned for small roles in commercials, educational films, and low-budget features shooting throughout the state. She landed her first speaking role in a tourism commercial for the Florida Department of Commerce, delivering her lines with the same confidence she had shown on pageant stages. The transition from pageants to professional modeling and acting felt natural. Tammy understood how to present herself, how to work with photographers and directors, and how to handle the business side of the entertainment industry. Linda managed her career carefully, turning down projects that seemed inappropriate or potentially exploitative. But the entertainment world in 1980 seconds, Florida was not always a safe place for young women. The cocaine trade had infiltrated many aspects of the film and music industries. Parties often featured drugs, alcohol, and older men looking to take advantage of aspiring young performers. Linda tried to shield Tammy from the darker aspects of the business, but it was not always possible. Tammy began encountering casting directors and photographers who made inappropriate comments or suggestions. Some offered additional work in exchange for personal favors. Others invited her to parties where drugs were openly used. Tammy learned to navigate these situations carefully, declining invitations that made her uncomfortable while maintaining professional relationships. Despite these challenges, her career continued to advance. By age 17, she was auditioning for speaking roles in feature films. Her portfolio included professional headshots by some of the most respected photographers in the Southeast. She had developed a reputation as a reliable, talented performer who could be trusted with increasingly important projects. Spring Break came first among her film opportunities. The teen comedy was filming in Fort Lauderdale during the height of spring break season in 1982. The production needed attractive young women for beach scenes and party sequences. Tammy's agent submitted her headshot and resume, highlighting her pageant experience and growing portfolio of commercial work. The audition took place in a hotel conference room overlooking the beach. Dozens of young women waited in line, all hoping for their chance at a screen test. When Tammy's turn came, she delivered her lines with the same poise she had shown in pageants. The casting director was impressed by her natural presence and her ability to take direction without multiple takes. Tammy landed a small speaking role as one of the college students enjoying spring break festivities. The part required her to deliver several lines of dialogue while participating in beach parties and hotel scenes. She was professional, punctual, and eager to learn every aspect of filmmaking. Between takes, she watched the crew work, asking questions about lighting, sound recording, and editing. The cast and crew liked working with her. She brought energy to every scene without being demanding or difficult. She listened to direction carefully and implemented suggestions immediately. Other actors appreciated her supportive attitude and willingness to help with their scenes as well. The director noted her potential and suggested she consider pursuing acting more seriously. The spring break experience gave Tammy her first real taste of professional filmmaking. She loved the collaborative nature of movie production, the creativity required to bring a script to life, and the technical challenges of capturing performances on camera. She began to see acting as more than just an extension of her pageant work. It could be a real career, a path to the kind of success she had always dreamed about. When Spring Break was released in theaters, Tammy attended the premiere with Linda and several friends. Seeing herself on the big screen was surreal and thrilling. The movie was not a critical success, but it performed well at the box office and established Tammy's credentials as a working actress. Industry publications listed her among the promising young performers to watch. Word of her spring break performance spread through the Florida film community. Agents began calling more frequently. Casting directors requested her for auditions without seeing her headshots first. She was developing a reputation as a reliable performer who could handle bigger roles and more challenging material. The call that would change everything came in early 1982. A major Hollywood production was filming in Miami. Director Brian De Palma was making a crime epic called Scarface, starring Al Pacino and Michelle Pfeiffer. The production needed attractive young women for nightclub scenes and background work in upscale Miami locations. Tammy's agent submitted her headshot without hesitation. The casting call took place at the Mutiny Hotel in Coconut Grove, which would also serve as one of the primary filming locations. The hotel's disco and restaurants were being transformed into the gaudy, cocaine-fueled world of 1980 seconds, Miami Vice. Hundreds of young women auditioned for roles as party guests, club patrons, and background performers in the film's elaborate party sequences. Tammy's audition lasted only a few minutes, but it was enough. The casting director liked her look, her professionalism, and her ability to fit into the glamorous but dangerous world the film was depicting. She was hired for several days of work in the club scenes, playing a partygoer in the background of some of the movie's most important sequences. The Scarface set was unlike anything Tammy had experienced. The budget was enormous by Florida standards. Famous actors moved through the scenes with the confidence of established stars. The crew included Hollywood veterans who had worked on major studio productions, Everything was bigger, more intense, and more professional than her previous film work. Al Pacino commanded the set with his presence and intensity. Tammy watched him prepare for scenes, studying how he inhabited the character of Tony Montana. She observed Michelle Pfeiffer's approach to her role as Elvira, noting the subtle ways she conveyed the character's intelligence and vulnerability beneath the glamorous surface. The club scenes required dozens of extras to create the atmosphere of Miami's high-end nightlife. Tammy and the other background performers wore expensive clothing provided by the costume department. They danced, laughed, and socialized, while the cameras captured the main action featuring the stars. The work was exciting but demanding, requiring long hours and multiple takes to achieve the director's vision. Between takes, Tammy socialized with cast and crew members. Some of the male crew members asked her out, drawn by her beauty and friendly personality. She politely declined most invitations, understanding that workplace relationships could become complicated. But she did attend a few cast parties, curious about the social side of the film industry. The parties were revelatory. They featured expensive champagne, elaborate catering, and a level of sophistication that impressed the young woman from Rockledge. But they also included open drug use, heavy drinking, and behavior that made Tammy uncomfortable. Cocaine was passed around openly at some gatherings. Older men made inappropriate comments to young women. The glamorous veneer of Hollywood partially disguised a darker reality. Tammy began to understand that the entertainment industry included dangers she had not previously considered. Some of the people involved in the production had criminal connections. Money from questionable sources helped finance films and parties. Young women were sometimes viewed as commodities rather than artists. The same qualities that made her successful in pageants and modeling could also make her a target for exploitation. Despite these concerns, working on Scarface was a career-defining experience. She was appearing in a major Hollywood production alongside established stars. Her name would appear in the credits of a film that was likely to be seen by millions of people. The experience validated her decision to pursue acting seriously and opened doors to even bigger opportunities. When filming wrapped, Tammy had mixed feelings about her Hollywood experience. She was proud of her work and excited about future opportunities, but she was also more aware of the potential dangers facing young women in the entertainment industry. She began to pay closer attention to the people around her and the situations she encountered. But something shifted dramatically in early 1983. Linda began noticing troubling changes in her daughter's behavior that went far beyond normal. Teenage moodiness or career stress. Tammy had always been outgoing, trusting, and confident. Now she seemed constantly on edge, looking over her shoulder and questioning everyone's motives. The first signs were subtle. Tammy would scan rooms when she entered, checking exits, and noting who was present. She stopped eating food she had not prepared herself or watched being prepared. She became reluctant to go out alone, even for routine errands she had handled independently for years. When friends invited her to parties or social gatherings, she would decline with vague excuses. Linda initially attributed these changes to the stress of her growing career and the pressures of young adulthood. The entertainment industry was competitive and demanding. Perhaps Tammy was simply learning to be more cautious as she navigated an increasingly complex professional world. But the changes became more pronounced and concerning as weeks passed. At a friend's birthday party in March, the extent of Tammy's fear became apparent to everyone present. When offered birthday cake and punch, she politely declined. When the hostess insisted, explaining that she had made the cake especially for the celebration, Tammy quietly confided that she was afraid someone might have poisoned it. Her friends laughed, thinking she was making a joke. Linda did not find it funny. The paranoia grew worse over the following weeks. Tammy started covering her drinks at restaurants, claiming she was worried about someone slipping drugs into them. She would only eat at home or at the houses of friends she had known for years. She spoke vaguely of people who wanted to hurt her, but she refused to provide specific details about who these people were or why they might wish her harm. Linda tried repeatedly to get answers from her daughter. Who was threatening her? What kind of danger was she afraid of? What had happened to make her so fearful? Tammy would only say that she might know too much about something she was not supposed to know. She had heard conversations. She had seen things. People were watching her, and they knew that she knew. The cryptic references frustrated and frightened Linda. Tammy seemed genuinely terrified, but she was being deliberately vague about the source of her fear. It was as if she was afraid that being more specific would somehow make the danger worse. She would start to explain, then stop herself, claiming it was better if Linda did not know the details. Friends and family members tried to help, but Tammy's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would accept invitations to social events, then call at the last minute to cancel, claiming she did not feel safe going out. She started asking friends to pick her up rather than driving herself places, saying she was worried about being followed. She began checking the locks on doors and windows multiple times before going to bed. The changes affected every aspect of her life. Her modeling career suffered as she missed appointments or showed up to photo shoots appearing anxious and distracted. Casting directors noticed her nervousness during auditions and began choosing other performers for roles she might have landed easily just months earlier. The bright future that had seemed so certain was beginning to slip away. Linda sought advice from friends, family members, and professionals, but no one could provide clear guidance. Tammy was not exhibiting symptoms of mental illness in any clinical sense. She was not hallucinating or displaying delusional thinking. Her fears seemed to be based on real experiences, even if she was unwilling to share the specific details. The situation became more concerning when Tammy mentioned receiving strange phone calls at home. The caller would remain silent when she answered, then hang up after a few seconds. Sometimes the phone would ring repeatedly during the night, but no one would be on the line when she picked up. She began asking Linda to answer the phone whenever possible, claiming she was afraid to hear the caller's voice. By late March, Linda was desperate for answers and professional help. Her daughter was clearly suffering from intense fear and anxiety, but no one could determine the cause or provide effective treatment. Against Tammy's vigorous protests, Linda decided to have her admitted to a local hospital for a comprehensive 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. The decision was not made lightly. Linda understood that involuntary psychiatric commitment could be traumatic and stigmatizing, but she was terrified that her daughter's mental state was deteriorating rapidly, and she needed medical professionals to assess the situation objectively. She hoped that doctors might be able to identify an underlying condition or provide treatment that would help Tammy regain her sense of security. The admission process was difficult for both mother and daughter. Tammy felt betrayed by Linda's decision to seek psychiatric evaluation without her consent. She argued that she was not mentally ill, just appropriately cautious about real dangers. She begged Linda to reconsider, promising to explain everything if she could just go home, but Linda held firm, believing that professional evaluation was necessary. The hospital's psychiatric ward was a sterile, institutional environment that felt nothing like the glamorous world Tammy had been inhabiting through her entertainment career. She was assigned to a private room and placed under observation by medical staff, trained to assess patients experiencing psychological crises. The contrast between her recent film work and her current circumstances was stark and depressing. The medical team ran every test they could think of to rule out physical causes for Tammy's symptoms. Blood work came back completely clean. No drugs, no alcohol, no toxins or medications that might cause paranoid thinking. Neurological tests showed no evidence of brain injury or illness. Her physical health was excellent, which only deepened the mystery surrounding her psychological state. Tammy submitted to interviews with psychiatrists, psychologists, and social workers. She was cooperative but guarded, answering questions honestly without providing the specific details that might explain her fears. The medical professionals found her to be intelligent, articulate, and genuinely frightened, but they could not determine the source of her terror or whether it was based on real threats. The psychiatric evaluation revealed no evidence of major mental illness. Tammy was not experiencing hallucinations, delusions, or thought disorders associated with conditions like schizophrenia. She was not exhibiting symptoms of bipolar disorder, major depression, or anxiety disorders, severe enough to require medication or extended treatment. Her thinking was clear and logical, even if her fears seemed excessive to outside observers. After 3 days of observation and testing, the medical staff had to release her. There was no legal basis to hold her longer without evidence of immediate danger to herself or others. Tammy had not threatened suicide or violence. She was not psychotic or delusional in any clinical sense. She was simply afraid of something the doctors could not identify or understand. Linda drove her daughter home from the hospital, feeling more helpless than ever. The medical evaluation had provided no answers and no relief. If anything, Tammy seemed more withdrawn and suspicious after the hospital stay. She interpreted the psychiatric evaluation as evidence that no one believed her fears were legitimate. She felt isolated and misunderstood by the people who were supposed to help her. The failed hospitalization marked a turning point in their relationship. Tammy began to see Linda as part of the problem, rather than part of the solution. She spent more time alone in her room, emerging only for meals or when friends called. She stopped discussing her fears entirely, claiming that no one would believe her anyway. The communication between mother and daughter, which had always been strong, began to break down. Summer arrived in Central Florida with its typical oppressive heat and humidity. Tammy had barely left the house in weeks claiming she felt safer at home where she could control her environment. Her modeling and acting career had essentially stopped. Agents stopped calling when she missed appointments or canceled shoots at the last minute. The bright future that had seemed so certain just months earlier was rapidly slipping away. Linda watched helplessly as her daughter's world contracted around her fears. The young woman who had once traveled confidently across the state for pageants and photo shoots now rarely ventured beyond their neighborhood. The ambitious performer who had dreamed of Hollywood stardom now spent most of her time hiding in her bedroom. Something had to change before Tammy's career and mental health were permanently damaged. On July 6, 1983, Keith Roberts called the house with a suggestion that seemed harmless enough. Roberts was a friend from Tammy's high school days, someone she had known long before her entertainment career began. He was not part of the modeling or film world that seemed to be the source of her fears. He suggested a simple trip to Cocoa Beach to get some fresh air and maybe lift her spirits. Linda was initially hesitant about the outing. Tammy had been reluctant to leave the house for weeks, and previous attempts to encourage her to go out had resulted in anxiety attacks and arguments. But Roberts was persistent, and Tammy seemed genuinely interested in the idea. She had always enjoyed the beach, and the familiar environment might help her feel more secure. Roberts arrived at the house around noon, driving his own car and presenting himself as the same reliable friend he had always been. Tammy appeared nervous about leaving, but she was also eager to escape the confines of her room. She packed a small bag with sunscreen and a change of clothes, kissing her mother goodbye before walking out to Roberts's car. Linda watched from the living room window as they drove away. The sight of her daughter leaving the house voluntarily for the first time in weeks filled her with hope. Perhaps spending time with an old friend in a relaxing environment would help Tammy begin to overcome her fears. Maybe this would be the first step toward returning to her normal life and career. She had no way of knowing that this would be the last time she would ever see her daughter alive. The drive from Rockledge to Cocoa Beach should have taken about 30 minutes under normal traffic conditions. It was a route Tammy had traveled countless times for pageants, photo shoots, and social activities. The familiar roads and landmarks might have been comforting to someone struggling with anxiety and paranoia, but according to Roberts' later testimony to police, the trip did not go as planned. He claimed that Tammy became agitated during the drive, demanding that he take her somewhere other than Cocoa Beach. When he refused, and continued toward their original destination, she became increasingly upset. The argument escalated throughout the drive, with both passengers becoming angry and frustrated. Roberts would later tell investigators that by the time they reached Cocoa Beach, the atmosphere in the car had become hostile. Tammy was no longer the nervous but hopeful young woman who had left Rockledge an hour earlier. She was angry, frightened, and demanding to be taken somewhere else immediately. Roberts claimed he was confused by her behavior and unsure how to respond to her demands. According to Keith Roberts' testimony, which would be scrutinized by investigators for years to come, he dropped Tammy off near the Glass Bank building on Highway A1A around 2 p.m. The building was a distinctive landmark in Cocoa Beach, its reflective exterior making it easily visible from the road. It was located in a busy commercial area with numerous gas stations, restaurants, and beach access points nearby. Roberts claimed that Tammy got out of the car while still angry from their argument during the drive. She refused his offers to drive her home or to wait while she called someone for alternative transportation. She simply walked away from the vehicle without looking back, leaving Roberts confused and frustrated by the encounter. He drove away, expecting her to call someone for a ride home when she calmed down. The Glass Bank area was not an isolated location where someone could disappear without being noticed. The highway carried steady traffic throughout the day. Pedestrians regularly walked between the various businesses and beach access points. If Tammy needed help, transportation, or simply wanted to call home, she would have had multiple options within walking distance. But despite the busy location and broad daylight circumstances, no witnesses came forward to report seeing Tammy after Roberts drove away. No surveillance cameras captured her image. No business owners or employees remembered serving her or seeing her use their phones. She simply vanished from a highly visible location during the middle of a busy afternoon. The absence of witnesses became one of the most puzzling aspects of the case. Investigators would later canvass every business in the area, showing Tammy's photograph and asking if anyone remembered seeing her on July 6. They interviewed beach workers, store clerks, restaurant staff, and regular customers who might have been in the area that afternoon. No one could provide any credible sighting of Tammy after 2 p.m. As afternoon turned to evening, Linda began to experience the familiar anxiety that accompanied any of Tammy's rare outings in recent months, but this time felt different. Tammy always called if plans changed or if she was going to be late. She had been religious about checking in with her mother, especially given her recent fears about her safety. The silence was ominous and uncharacteristic. Linda tried calling Roberts' house repeatedly, but no one answered the phone. She called Tammy's friends, but none had heard from her since the morning. She drove to some of Tammy's favorite local spots, hoping to find her daughter or someone who had seen her. Each failed attempt to locate Tammy increased Linda's panic and sense of helplessness. The evening hours passed slowly and painfully. Linda sat by the phone, willing it to ring with news of Tammy's whereabouts. She checked the locks on doors and windows, wondering if her daughter's fears about being watched had been more legitimate than anyone realized. She prayed that Tammy was safe somewhere, perhaps staying with a friend to avoid whatever dangers she believed were threatening her. By midnight, Linda could not wait any longer. Her daughter had been missing for 10 hours without any communication, which was completely unlike Tammy's behavior, even during her most anxious periods. Something was seriously wrong, and Linda needed professional help to find her daughter. She drove to the Brevard County Sheriff's Office and filed a missing person report. The desk sergeant who took the initial report was polite, but not particularly concerned about the situation. 18-year-olds often stayed out late without calling home, especially during summer months when social activities extended well into the evening hours. The fact that Tammy had left voluntarily with a friend made the situation seem less urgent than cases involving younger children or evidence of foul play. Linda tried to explain that this situation was different. Her daughter had been experiencing severe anxiety and paranoia for months. She never stayed out late without calling. She had been afraid to leave the house, making her decision to go to Cocoa Beach significant, and her failure to return home deeply concerning. But the officer suggested waiting until morning before taking further action. Unable to sleep and unwilling to wait for official help, Linda drove to Cocoa Beach and began searching for her daughter herself. She started at the Glass Bank building where Roberts claimed to have dropped Tammy off, then expanded her search to nearby businesses and beach areas. She called Tammy's name repeatedly, hoping her daughter might hear her and respond. The search continued through the night and into the early morning hours. Linda checked every business that was still open, showing Tammy's photograph to late-night workers and asking if they had seen her daughter. She walked along the beach with a flashlight, calling out and listening for any response. She checked parking lots, alleys, and any place where Tammy might have taken shelter. The dawn brought no relief or answers. Tammy had not come home during the night. Her bed remained untouched. Her purse and identification were missing, but most of her clothes and personal belongings remained in her room. There was no note, no message, no indication of where she might have gone or why she had not returned home. Linda called the police again, this time speaking with more urgency and authority. She demanded that investigators take immediate action to locate her missing daughter. She provided detailed information about Tammy's recent fears and behavioral changes, emphasizing that her failure to return home represented a genuine emergency rather than typical teenage rebellion. Detective Harold Lewis was assigned to lead the investigation. Lewis was a veteran law enforcement officer with 20 years of experience in criminal investigations. He had handled numerous missing person cases and understood the critical importance of the first 24 to 48 hours in determining outcomes. He took Linda's concerns seriously and began immediate action to locate Tammy. Lewis's first step was to interview Keith Roberts extensively about the events of July 6. Roberts was cooperative but seemed genuinely confused by what had happened. He maintained that he had simply offered to take Tammy to the beach to help her feel better. The argument during the drive had surprised him, and her angry departure from his car had left him uncertain about what to do next. Roberts agreed to take a polygraph test to verify his account of events. The test results indicated that he was telling the truth about his version of what happened. His timeline checked out when investigators verified his movements before and after the trip to Cocoa Beach. Phone records and witness statements supported his claim that he had no involvement in Tammy's disappearance after dropping her off. But Detective Lewis remained troubled by several aspects of the case. The complete absence of witnesses after the alleged drop-off seemed unlikely, given the busy location and time of day. Roberts' account of an argument during the drive raised questions about what might have triggered Tammy's agitation. The young woman's recent fears and paranoid behavior suggested that her disappearance might be connected to whatever had been frightening her for months. Within days of her disappearance, Tammy's case made headlines across Central Florida. Local television stations led their evening newscasts with stories about the missing beauty queen and aspiring actress. Newspapers published large photographs of Tammy alongside detailed accounts of her disappearance from Cocoa Beach. The story contained all the elements that captured public attention: a beautiful young woman with Hollywood connections who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. The media coverage had both positive and negative effects on the investigation. On one hand, it generated widespread public awareness and prompted numerous tips from people who believed they had seen Tammy. On the other hand, it also attracted attention from publicity seekers, conspiracy theorists, and individuals who provided false information that consumed valuable investigative resources. Tips flooded into the police station from across the state and beyond. People reported seeing Tammy at shopping malls in Orlando, restaurants in Miami, bus stations in Jacksonville, and airports as far away as Atlanta. Each potential sighting required investigation, no matter how unlikely or contradictory to established facts. Detective Lewis and his team spent countless hours chasing leads that ultimately led nowhere. The most intriguing and mysterious tips came in the form of 2 anonymous phone calls received in the weeks immediately following Tammy's disappearance. The calls were made to the police station's direct line, bypassing the tip hotline that was being monitored and recorded. A woman's voice, speaking carefully and deliberately, told Detective Lewis that Tammy was alive but hiding somewhere safe. The first call came 3 weeks after the disappearance. The caller identified herself only as someone who knew Tammy's whereabouts. She claimed that Tammy was safe but scared and could not reveal herself because she was still in danger from the people who had been threatening her. When pressed for more specific information, the caller said that Tammy would come forward when it was safe to do so, but could not risk exposure at the current time. Detective Lewis attempted to trace the call, but the caller had used a payphone at a shopping center in Titusville, about 30 miles from Cocoa Beach. Security cameras at the location had been turned off for maintenance, preventing investigators from identifying who had made the call. The voice was that of a mature woman, not a young person, leading Lewis to suspect it might be an older relative or family friend. The second anonymous call came 6 weeks later, again to the direct police line. The same female voice provided a similar message, claiming that Tammy was still alive and hiding but could not safely return home yet. This time, the caller provided slightly more detail, saying that Tammy was somewhere warm and safe and was being taken care of by people who love her. The call was again made from a payphone, this time in Melbourne, and could not be traced to a specific individual. These mysterious calls tormented Linda Curtis and frustrated investigators. If Tammy was truly alive and hiding, why had she not contacted her mother directly? If she was being protected by people who cared about her, why the elaborate secrecy? If she was still in danger, what was the nature of the threat, and who was responsible for it? Detective Lewis developed several theories about the anonymous calls. One possibility was that a well-meaning friend or relative was providing false hope to spare Linda the pain of accepting her daughter's likely death. Another theory suggested that someone with knowledge of what had really happened to Tammy was using the calls to deflect attention from the true circumstances of her disappearance. The calls also raised the disturbing possibility that Tammy had indeed survived her initial disappearance, but was being held against her will by people who wanted to keep her hidden. This theory gained credibility when investigators considered her months of fear and paranoid behavior before vanishing. Perhaps the threats she had been receiving were more serious and immediate than anyone had realized. The first anniversary of Tammy's disappearance arrived on July 6, 1984, with suffocating heat, humidity, and still no answers about her fate. Linda Curtis, who had spent every day of the preceding year searching for her daughter and pressuring investigators to work harder, organized a candlelight vigil at Cocoa Beach near the Glass Bank building where Tammy was last seen. The planning for the memorial service revealed both the depth of community support for the Curtis family and the widespread fascination with Tammy's story. Local churches offered to help with organization and promotion. Businesses donated candles, flowers, and refreshments. Media outlets provided free advertising to ensure maximum attendance. The response demonstrated that Tammy's disappearance had touched people far beyond her immediate circle of family and friends. About 50 people attended the vigil on that sweltering evening, including family members, friends from high school, former pageant competitors, and community members who had never met Tammy but were moved by her story. The gathering represented different aspects of her life: the pageant world that had shaped her childhood, the entertainment industry that had offered her a career, and the local community that had watched her grow up. Linda spoke briefly to the assembled crowd, her voice cracking with emotion as she pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. She maintained her belief that Tammy was still alive somewhere, perhaps being held against her will by people connected to whatever had frightened her so severely in the months before her disappearance. She refused to consider the possibility that her daughter might be dead. The vigil was covered extensively by local television stations and newspapers. Tammy's photograph appeared on screens and front pages across Central Florida once again, accompanied by renewed appeals for information from the public. The anniversary coverage generated a brief spike in tips to the police department, but none provided substantial new leads or evidence. That same week, shocking news broke from another part of Florida that would cast a long and disturbing shadow over Tammy's case for years to come. Christopher Wilder, a wealthy race car driver and photographer from South Florida, had died in a shootout with police in New Hampshire after leading authorities on a cross-country manhunt. Investigators quickly connected Wilder to a series of abductions, sexual assaults, and murders of young women across multiple states. His victims were typically attractive young women between the ages of 16 and 25 whom he approached. With promises of modeling work or photography sessions, he would lure them to isolated locations where he would assault them, often killing them afterward. The revelation of Wilder's crimes sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies in every state where he had operated. Cold case files were reopened. Missing person reports were reviewed. Families of victims and missing women demanded answers about possible connections to the serial killer who had been operating undetected for years. Christopher Wilder's crime spree had begun in earnest in February 1984, just months after Tammy's disappearance. But investigators quickly discovered that he had been active much longer than initially believed. His victim profile and methods immediately raised alarming questions about a possible connection to Tammy's case. Wilder had been living in Boynton Beach, Florida, when Tammy disappeared in July 1983. His business activities required frequent travel throughout the state, including regular trips to Central Florida for racing events and photography assignments. He had extensive contacts in the modeling and entertainment industries, exactly the circles where Tammy had been working before her disappearance. The killer's standard approach involved approaching young women with promises of modeling work or photography sessions. He would present himself as a professional photographer or talent scout, often showing examples of his previous work and offering lucrative contracts. His wealth and apparent success in the racing world lent credibility to his claims and helped him gain the trust of potential victims. Detective Lewis immediately reopened Tammy's case files and began searching for any possible connection to Christopher Wilder. Had Tammy encountered him during her modeling career? Could he have approached her with promises of work that seemed too good to refuse? The investigation revealed several troubling coincidences that suggested a possible link. Wilder had attended several Florida modeling and entertainment industry events that Tammy had also attended in the months before her disappearance. Race car events, photography exhibitions, and film industry parties had brought them into the same venues on multiple occasions. While no direct interaction could be confirmed, the overlap in their social circles was significant. More disturbing was the discovery that Wilder had approached several other young models and actresses in the Florida market with offers of work during 1982 and 1983. Some of these women had accepted his propositions and participated in photography sessions that later made them uncomfortable. Others had declined his offers after sensing something unsettling about his manner or requests. The investigation also revealed that Wilder's known methods closely matched the sources of fear that Tammy had been experiencing in the months before her disappearance. He was known to stalk potential victims before approaching them directly. He would appear at their regular haunts, learn their schedules, and gather information about their personal lives before making contact. Linda Curtis became convinced that Christopher Wilder was responsible for her daughter's disappearance and likely death. The circumstantial evidence seemed overwhelming. The timing, the victim profile, the geographic overlap, and the methods all pointed toward Wilder as the most likely suspect. She demanded that investigators focus their efforts on proving the connection, but Detective Lewis and his team faced significant challenges in building a case against the dead serial killer. Wilder had been killed during his capture in New Hampshire, eliminating any possibility of confession or interrogation. His death had occurred during a violent confrontation that left many questions unanswered about his full range of criminal activities. Linda Curtis filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Christopher Wilder's estate, seeking both financial compensation and official acknowledgement that he was responsible for Tammy's disappearance. The legal action was more about finding answers than recovering money, as Linda hoped that the civil investigation might uncover evidence that criminal investigators had missed. The lawsuit process dragged on for several years, consuming enormous amounts of time, energy, and financial resources. Depositions were taken from Wilder's associates, family members, and business contacts. His travel records, financial documents, and personal belongings were examined for any evidence connecting him to Tammy's case. Despite extensive investigation and legal proceedings, the lawsuit ultimately failed to produce concrete evidence definitively linking Christopher Wilder to Tammy's disappearance. The circumstantial evidence was compelling but not conclusive enough to meet legal standards for liability. The case was eventually dismissed, leaving Linda without the answers she desperately sought. As the Christopher Wilder connection failed to produce definitive answers, another deeply disturbing name emerged in connection with missing women in Central Florida. John Brennan Crutchley, an engineer who worked for various defense contractors throughout the region, was arrested in November 1985 for the kidnapping and sexual assault of a young woman in Brevard County. The victim's story was horrifying and surreal. Crutchley had picked her up as she hitchhiked along a busy road, then driven her to his isolated home in Malabar, where he subjected her to hours of torture and sexual assault. Most disturbing of all, he had drained significant amounts of her blood and apparently consumed it, earning him the media nickname Vampire Rapist. The young woman had managed to escape from Crutchley's house and flagged down a passing motorist who took her to a hospital. Her account of the assault was so bizarre that investigators initially questioned whether she was telling the truth. But physical evidence at Crutchley's home confirmed the essential details of her story and revealed that he had been engaged in similar activities for an extended period. During the search of Crutchley's property, investigators discovered evidence suggesting that he might be responsible for other disappearances and assaults in the region. His work as an engineer required frequent travel throughout Central Florida, giving him access to potential victims across multiple counties. He had detailed knowledge of remote locations where bodies could be hidden and crimes could be committed without detection. Crutchley's psychological profile was deeply disturbing. Unlike Christopher Wilder, who used charm and promises of career advancement to lure victims, Crutchley relied on opportunity and violence. He sought out vulnerable women who were alone and unlikely to be missed immediately. His methods were more predatory and less sophisticated than Wilder's, but potentially more dangerous for victims who encountered him. The Vampire Rapist case generated intense media coverage throughout Florida and beyond. The bizarre nature of Crutchley's crimes captured public attention and sparked widespread fear among women living alone or traveling independently. Law enforcement agencies across the state began reviewing unsolved cases involving missing women to determine if Crutchley might be connected to other crimes. Detective Lewis added Crutchley's name to the growing list of possible suspects in Tammy's disappearance. The timing worked. Crutchley had been living and working in Central Florida during July 1983. His pattern of targeting young women matched Tammy's demographic profile. His knowledge of the local area and access to isolated locations could explain how she had vanished so completely from a busy public area. Lewis arranged to interview Crutchley at the county jail, where he was being held pending trial for the Taltese documented assault. The meeting took place in a sterile interview room under high security conditions. Crutchley was cooperative, but revealed nothing useful about Tammy's case. He denied any knowledge of her disappearance and claimed never to have heard her name before the interview. The interview was frustrating for Lewis, who had hoped that Crutchley might provide information about other crimes if approached correctly. But the suspect was too intelligent and careful to admit to anything beyond the charges for which he had already been arrested. Without physical evidence or witness testimony connecting him to Tammy, investigators could not pursue the connection further. Crutchley was eventually convicted of the documented assault and sentenced to prison, where he remained for many years before his death in 2002. Throughout his incarceration, he was periodically questioned about other missing person cases, but he never provided useful information about any additional crimes. His potential connection to Tammy's disappearance remained speculation rather than established fact. The emergence of two different serial killers operating in Florida during the period of Tammy's disappearance highlighted the dangerous environment facing young women in the entertainment industry during the 1,980 seconds. Both Wilder and Crutchley had targeted attractive young women, though their methods and motivations differed significantly. The fact that either could have been responsible for Tammy's fate underscored the random and terrifying nature of such crimes. As the years passed and the initial intensity of the investigation began to fade, the practical challenges of maintaining an active missing person case became increasingly overwhelming. The original case files grew thick with reports, photographs, witness statements, and tip sheets, but the most crucial pieces of evidence gradually disappeared through a combination of bureaucratic indifference and institutional failure. The loss of key evidence began early in the investigation and continued for years afterward. Within the first year of Tammy's disappearance, her dental records were lost during a routine reorganization of files at her dentist's office. The dental practice had changed hands, and the new owners discarded older records to make space for current patients. No one realized the importance of preserving Tammy's dental charts until it was too late. Her fingerprints, which had been taken during her brief modeling career for background checks required by some agencies, vanished from files that were destroyed during routine cleanouts of business records. The modeling agencies that had worked with Tammy went out of business, or were sold to new owners who saw no value in maintaining old paperwork. Within 5 years of her disappearance, virtually all physical evidence that could have been used to identify her remains had been lost. The disappearance of these basic identification tools was devastating for the long-term prospects of solving the case. Without dental records or fingerprints, investigators could not definitively identify any human remains that might be discovered in the future. Several sets of unidentified bones found in Central Florida over the years could potentially have belonged to Tammy, but there was no scientific way to confirm or rule out the connection. Police evidence storage also proved inadequate for maintaining case materials over extended periods. Photographs faded due to improper storage conditions. Documents became damaged by humidity and temperature fluctuations. Audio recordings of witness interviews degraded to the point where they became inaudible. Video surveillance tapes from businesses near the glass bank were recorded over or discarded long before anyone realized their potential importance. The institutional memory of the case also began to erode as personnel changes affected the sheriff's department. Detective Lewis, who had developed the most comprehensive understanding of the case details and had established relationships with Tammy's family and friends, retired in the early 1992. His replacement lacked the institutional knowledge and personal investment that had driven the initial investigation. Younger investigators who inherited the case file were overwhelmed by the volume of materials and the complexity of the timeline. They lacked the context that comes from being present during the original investigation. Important details that Lewis had committed to memory were not adequately documented in the written reports, creating gaps in understanding that could not be filled years later. The case was also affected by changing priorities within law enforcement agencies. New crimes demanded immediate attention and resources. Cold cases, particularly those lacking physical evidence or promising leads, received less attention as departments focused on current investigations. Tammy's case gradually moved from active investigation to periodic review to long-term storage. Budget constraints further limited the resources available for cold case investigations. The extensive travel required to follow up on tips from across the country became prohibitively expensive. Laboratory tests that might have provided new insights into existing evidence were deferred indefinitely due to cost considerations. The case became a victim of bureaucratic realities that prioritized immediate needs over long-term justice. Linda Curtis's health began a slow but steady decline in the mid-1990s, as the physical and emotional toll of more than a decade of searching for her daughter finally overwhelmed her body's ability to cope. The stress of living with unanswered questions, combined with the frustration of watching the investigation lose momentum, manifested in a variety of health problems that doctors struggled to treat effectively. She suffered from chronic insomnia, lying awake night after night wondering what had happened to Tammy and whether she was still alive somewhere. The sleep deprivation affected her immune system, making her susceptible to frequent illnesses that further weakened her overall health. She lost significant weight as anxiety and depression suppressed her appetite and made eating feel pointless. The psychological impact was even more severe than the physical symptoms. Linda experienced persistent depression punctuated by periods of intense anxiety whenever new tips or potential leads emerged. Each false hope followed by disappointment created additional emotional trauma. She began to withdraw from social activities and friendships, finding it difficult to engage in normal conversations when her thoughts were constantly focused on her missing daughter. In her final months, Linda embarked on a desperate letter-writing campaign to anyone she thought might be able to help revive interest in Tammy's case. She wrote to police chiefs, sheriffs, FBI agents, journalists, television producers, and politicians throughout Florida and beyond. Each letter contained a detailed account of Tammy's disappearance and a passionate plea for renewed investigation. The letters revealed the depth of a mother's love and the persistence of hope, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Linda refused to accept that her daughter was dead, maintaining until the end that Tammy was alive somewhere and would return home when it was safe to do so. She continued to believe that the anonymous phone calls claiming Tammy was hiding were genuine rather than cruel hoaxes. She begged investigators not to give up on the case, offering to pay for additional tests, travel expenses, or any other costs associated with renewed investigation. She provided detailed timelines, lists of potential witnesses who had never been interviewed, and theories about connections that had not been adequately explored. Her letters demonstrated an encyclopedic knowledge of every detail related to her daughter's disappearance. Linda also wrote letters to Tammy herself, addressing them to general delivery at post offices in cities where sightings had been reported over the years. These letters contained messages of love, forgiveness, and assurance that it was safe to come home. She promised that whatever had frightened Tammy into hiding would be resolved, and that they could rebuild their lives together. The letter-writing campaign consumed Linda's remaining energy and financial resources. She spent money she could not afford on postage, copies, and long-distance phone calls to follow up on her written appeals. She neglected her own health and basic needs while focusing obsessively on finding new avenues for publicizing Tammy's case. Linda Curtis died in 1995, 12 years to the day after her daughter's disappearance. She passed away in her sleep at home, surrounded by boxes of case files, newspaper clippings, and copies of the hundreds of letters she had written over the years. Her death certificate listed heart failure as the immediate cause, but everyone who knew her understood that she had died of a broken heart. Her death marked the end of the most passionate and persistent advocacy for keeping Tammy's case active. Family members and friends tried to maintain pressure on investigators and media outlets, but no one could match Linda's relentless determination and emotional investment. The case lost its most effective champion just when sustained public attention might have generated new leads or evidence. Among Linda's belongings, investigators found a final letter addressed to the lead detective on Tammy's case. The handwritten note, dated just days before her death, contained one last desperate plea for justice. She wrote that she was running out of time but could not give up hope that someone would finally provide the answers that had eluded investigators for so long. In the mid-1990 seconds, shortly before Linda Curtis's death, Tammy's case was selected for featuring on the popular television show Unsolved Mysteries. The program, hosted by Robert Stack, had developed a reputation for generating new leads in cold cases through its dramatic presentations and national reach. The producers were drawn to Tammy's story because it contained the elements that made for compelling television: a beautiful victim, mysterious circumstances, and multiple theories about what might have happened. The filming process was emotionally difficult for Linda, who was already struggling with declining health and the approach of the 12th anniversary of her daughter's disappearance. She agreed to participate because she hoped that national exposure might finally generate the breakthrough that had eluded local investigators. The show's track record of solving cases provided a glimmer of hope that had been missing from her life for years. The episode featured extensive interviews with Linda Curtis, who appeared frail but determined as she recounted her daughter's final months and the circumstances of her disappearance. She spoke directly to the camera, pleading with viewers to provide any information that might help solve the case. Her emotional appeal was one of the most powerful segments ever aired on the program. Detective Lewis, recently retired but still deeply invested in the case, also participated in the filming. He provided a professional law enforcement perspective on the investigation, explaining the challenges faced by investigators and the various theories that had been explored over the years. His credibility and obvious commitment to finding answers lent weight to the family's appeals for help. The show's producers created age-progressed images showing what Tammy might look like as an adult in her 30s. The computer-generated portraits showed a mature woman with Tammy's distinctive features but marked by the experiences and wisdom of additional years. The images were both hopeful and heartbreaking, suggesting a future that might never be realized. The Unsolved Mysteries episode also explored the various theories that had emerged over the years. The Christopher Wilder connection was examined in detail, with dramatic recreations of his known crimes and analysis of the circumstantial evidence linking him to Tammy's case. The program also discussed the John Crutchley possibility and the mysterious anonymous phone calls claiming Tammy was alive. When the episode aired nationally, it generated an unprecedented response from viewers across the country. The show's toll-free tip line was flooded with calls from people who believed they had seen women resembling the age-progressed images. Tips came from cities as far away as Seattle, Denver, and Boston, suggesting that if Tammy was alive, she might have traveled far from Florida. Each tip required investigation, no matter how remote the location or unlikely the circumstances. Local law enforcement agencies across the country were contacted to follow up on sightings. Photographs were shown to witnesses. Background checks were conducted on women who matched Tammy's general description. The process consumed enormous resources but generated no confirmed sightings. Some of the tips were clearly the result of well-intentioned mistakes. People who had seen the show genuinely believed they recognized someone they knew or had encountered, but closer investigation revealed that the similarities were superficial. Other tips appeared to be deliberate false reports from attention seekers who wanted to be part of a famous case. A few tips contained enough specific detail to warrant serious investigation. One caller claimed to have worked with a woman named Tammy at a restaurant in Colorado, who had mentioned being from Florida and seemed nervous about her past. Another reported seeing a woman at a shopping mall in Arizona who had reacted with apparent recognition when approached by someone calling her Tammy. Despite extensive follow-up investigation, none of the tips generated by the Unsolved Mysteries episode led to any breakthrough in the case. The national exposure had raised awareness and generated public interest, but it had not produced the answers that Linda Curtis and investigators had hoped to find. The failure to solve the case despite such widespread attention was particularly devastating for Linda, who had invested so much hope in the program's potential impact. The dawn of the new millennium brought revolutionary technological advances that transformed every aspect of criminal investigation and missing person cases. Digital databases allowed investigators to cross-reference cases across multiple jurisdictions instantly. DNA analysis could identify suspects and victims from microscopic evidence samples. Advanced computer systems could process and analyze vast amounts of information that would have taken investigators years to review manually. Cold cases that had seemed hopeless during the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds suddenly had new life as forensic techniques advanced beyond anything previously imagined. Remains that had been unidentifiable for decades could now be matched to missing persons through DNA extracted from bone fragments or teeth. Criminal databases could connect similar cases across state and national boundaries, revealing patterns that had been invisible to individual investigators. But Tammy's case remained frustratingly stuck in the technological past, unable to benefit from many of these advances due to the systematic loss of physical evidence that had occurred over the years. The absence of dental records meant that even the most sophisticated forensic techniques could not definitively identify remains that might belong to her. The loss of fingerprints eliminated another standard method of identification. More problematically, there was no physical evidence from the crime scene to test for DNA. Unlike cases where victims had been found and forensic evidence preserved, Tammy's disappearance had left investigators with no biological samples, clothing fibers, or other materials that could be subjected to modern analysis. The case had become a victim of its own mysterious nature. The digitization of case files did help organize and preserve the vast amount of paperwork that had accumulated over nearly 2 decades of investigation. Detective reports, witness statements, tip sheets, and photographs were scanned into computer systems that made them searchable and accessible to multiple investigators simultaneously. This technological improvement prevented further loss of information but could not recover what had already been destroyed. A new generation of detectives periodically reviewed the digitized files, applying modern investigative techniques to old witness statements and suspect profiles. They used computer programs to analyze timelines, map locations, and identify patterns that might have been missed during the original investigation. They cross-referenced databases to look for similar cases or suspects who might be connected to Tammy's disappearance. But without new evidence or witnesses, the technological advantages could only reorganize and analyze existing information more efficiently. The fundamental problem remained unchanged. Investigators knew what had happened. Tammy had disappeared from Cocoa Beach, and when it had happened, July 6, 1983, but they had no reliable information about who was responsible or what had occurred after she was last seen. The case files were also digitized and entered into national missing person databases that made Tammy's information accessible to law enforcement agencies throughout the country. Her photograph and vital statistics were included in systems monitored by police departments, coroner's offices, and medical examiners across all 50 states. Any unidentified remains or suspicious deaths involving women of her age and description would automatically trigger comparisons to her case. In 2003, 20 years after Tammy's disappearance, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children created new age-progressed images showing what she might look like as an adult. Using advanced computer software and techniques developed by forensic artists, they projected how her face might have changed over 2 decades of life experiences. The age progression process involved analyzing Tammy's bone structure, facial features, and family genetics to predict how aging would affect her appearance. Specialists studied photographs of her parents and other relatives at various ages to understand hereditary patterns that might influence her adult appearance. They considered factors like weight changes, sun exposure, stress, and lifestyle choices that could affect facial aging. The resulting images showed a mature woman at ages 30, 35, and 40, with Tammy's distinctive eyes and bone structure, but marked by the wisdom and experience of adulthood. The computer-generated portraits attempted to maintain her essential features while accounting for the natural changes that occur as people age. The eyes remained bright and hopeful, but they were surrounded by the lines and character that come with life experience. The images were both hopeful and heartbreaking for those who had known Tammy as a teenager. They represented the woman she might have become if she had been able to pursue her dreams of acting and modeling. They showed a face that could belong to a successful professional, a devoted mother, or any of countless other possibilities that her disappearance had foreclosed. Linda's surviving relatives and friends saw the age-progressed images and wept for the futures that had been stolen along with Tammy herself. The woman in the sketches could have been living anywhere, under any name, pursuing any career. She could have been the mother of teenagers by then, or a successful businesswoman, or an artist, or a teacher. The possibilities were endless and painful to contemplate. The age-progressed images were distributed to media outlets throughout the country and posted on websites dedicated to missing persons cases. They appeared in newspapers, magazines, and television programs, accompanied by renewed appeals for information from the public. The updated portraits generated a brief spike in tips and alleged sightings, but none proved to be legitimate leads. Law enforcement agencies across the country received copies of the age-progressed images for comparison with unidentified persons in their jurisdictions. The portraits were particularly useful for investigators working cases involving women who had been found with no identification or memory of their past. Several women were questioned about possible connections to Tammy's case, but none proved to be the missing beauty queen. The creation of age-progressed images also served a psychological purpose for investigators and family members who continued to hope that Tammy might still be alive. The portraits provided a concrete visualization of what reunion might look like after decades of separation. They kept hope alive while acknowledging the reality that enormous changes would have occurred over 20 years. But as the years continued to pass without any confirmed sightings or credible leads, investigators began to accept the likelihood that Tammy had died shortly after her disappearance in 1983. The age-progressed images became less about finding a living person and more about honoring the memory of a young woman whose potential had been cut short by unknown circumstances. By the 2010 seconds, as the case entered its fourth decade without resolution, Tammy's story had found new life in the rapidly expanding world of online communities dedicated to unsolved mysteries and true crime cases. Amateur investigators with no connection to law enforcement or the original investigation pored over police reports that had been released under public records laws, creating detailed timelines and analyzing evidence with the passion of professional detectives. These online forums brought together people from across the country who shared an obsession with cold cases and missing person mysteries. They included retired law enforcement officers, amateur genealogists, forensic science enthusiasts, and ordinary citizens who were fascinated by unsolved crimes. Their collective knowledge and diverse perspectives sometimes generated insights that had been missed by official investigators. Some online communities focused specifically on the Christopher Wilder connection, analyzing his known movements throughout 1983 and looking for any overlap with Tammy's activities before her disappearance. They mapped his travel patterns, documented his known victims, and searched for similarities in methods that might definitively link him to Tammy's case. Their research was thorough and well documented, but it ultimately confirmed what official investigators had already concluded. The connection was possible, but not provable. Other online investigators explored the John Crutchley angle with similar intensity, seeking evidence that might have been missed during the original investigation into the vampire rapist. They analyzed his work schedules, travel records, and known activities to determine whether he could have been in the Cocoa Beach area on July 6, 1983. Again, their research was exhaustive, but inconclusive. A few online communities pursued entirely new theories that had not been extensively explored by official investigators. Some suggested that Tammy's fears in her final months were connected to drug trafficking operations in the Brevard County area during the height of the cocaine trade. They researched known dealers, smuggling operations, and related violence to determine whether Tammy might have witnessed something that put her in danger. Others proposed that her disappearance was connected to organized crime, figures who were using the entertainment industry as a front for illegal activities. They investigated connections between modeling agencies, film productions, and known criminal enterprises, looking for evidence that Tammy might have been eliminated to prevent her from exposing illegal operations. The online investigation communities also focused attention on the mysterious anonymous phone calls, claiming that Tammy was alive and hiding. They analyzed the timing of the calls, the locations from which they were made, and the specific language used by the caller. Some theorists believed the calls were genuine, and that Tammy had indeed survived her initial disappearance but had been forced to assume a new identity for her protection. The 30th anniversary of Tammy's disappearance in 2013 brought renewed media attention to the case. Local television stations ran retrospective segments examining how the investigation had evolved over 3 decades. Newspapers published detailed timeline articles reviewing the various theories and suspects that had emerged over the years. The anniversary coverage generated dozens of new tips, but none provided substantial new evidence. The community of Cocoa Beach had gradually embraced Tammy's memory, transforming the area around the Glass Bank building into an informal memorial site. Visitors regularly left flowers, candles, and painted stones decorated with messages of hope and remembrance. The building's reflective surface became adorned with small plaques and memorial stickers placed by people who refused to let her story be forgotten. Local businesses near the site began acknowledging Tammy's connection to their area. Some displayed photographs or articles about her case. Others participated in annual memorial events or fundraising activities for missing person organizations. The community's response demonstrated that tragic events could bring people together and create lasting bonds of support and remembrance. In 2015, more than 30 years after Tammy's disappearance, a new detective assigned to the cold case unit began exploring the theory that her fears during her final months were connected to drug trafficking operations in Central Florida. The 1,980 seconds had been a period of intense cocaine smuggling through Florida ports and coastal areas, with Brevard County serving as a major distribution hub for drugs heading north along the Interstate 95 corridor. Detective Sarah Martinez approached the case with fresh eyes and access to decades of additional intelligence about drug operations that had been active during the early 1,980 seconds. She reviewed DEA reports, arrest records, and surveillance data from federal investigations that had been conducted during and after the period of Tammy's disappearance. The scope of cocaine trafficking during that era was much larger than investigators had originally understood. The review revealed that several major drug distribution networks had been operating in the exact geographic area where Tammy lived and worked. These organizations imported cocaine through ports in South Florida, then transported it north through Central Florida using Interstate 95 and other major highways. Brevard County was a crucial waypoint in this pipeline, providing temporary storage and distribution facilities for drugs destined for markets in Georgia, the Carolinas, and beyond. More significantly, Martinez discovered that the entertainment industry in South Florida, during the early 1,980 seconds, had been heavily infiltrated by drug money and criminal organizations. Modeling agencies, talent scouts, photography studios, and film production companies were sometimes used as fronts for money laundering operations or as venues for distributing drugs to wealthy clients in the entertainment world. Several individuals connected to the Florida film industry during Tammy's brief career had been arrested on drug charges in subsequent years. Some had been convicted of major trafficking offenses and received lengthy federal prison sentences. Others had been identified as associates of known criminal organizations, but had never been successfully prosecuted due to insufficient evidence or witness intimidation. The investigation revealed that several men who had approached Tammy with romantic or professional interest during her work on Spring Break and Scarface had criminal records related to drug trafficking. She had wisely declined most of their invitations and had avoided attending parties where drugs were openly used, but she might have overheard conversations or witnessed activities that put her in danger. This theory gained credibility when Martinez discovered documentation that Tammy had mentioned to friends that she was afraid because she knew too much about something she was not supposed to know. The vague language suggested that she was being careful not to reveal specific details, possibly because she feared retaliation from dangerous people who were involved in illegal activities. The drug connection theory also explained the escalation of Tammy's fears during the months leading up to her disappearance. If she had inadvertently learned about criminal activities through her entertainment industry connections, the people involved might have become aware of her knowledge and decided that she posed a threat to their operations. The paranoid behavior she exhibited could have been an appropriate response to real surveillance and intimidation. Martinez interviewed several retired law enforcement officers who had worked drug cases in Central Florida during the 1,980 280. They confirmed that violence against potential witnesses was common during that period, and that young women who became involved with men connected to trafficking operations often faced serious dangers. Some had been killed to prevent them from cooperating with law enforcement investigations. The detective also reviewed cases of other young women who had disappeared from Central Florida during the early 1980s. She found several instances where missing person cases had eventually been connected to drug-related violence, though the connections had not been recognized until years later, when arrested traffickers provided information about their past crimes. Despite the compelling nature of this theory, Martinez faced the same evidentiary challenges that had frustrated investigators for decades. The passage of time had made it impossible to interview many of the key figures from the drug investigations of the 1980s. Some had died, others had disappeared, and still others refused to cooperate with law enforcement for their own safety. As the 35th anniversary of Tammy's disappearance approached in 2018, investigators conducted another comprehensive review of the case files as part of a county-wide initiative to apply modern techniques to cold cases. The review process was both systematic and sobering, revealing the extent to which crucial evidence and information had been lost over the decades through institutional failures and the simple passage of time. The current case file consisted of dozens of boxes containing thousands of pages of reports, photographs, witness statements, and correspondence. But investigators quickly discovered that even more material had been lost over the years than previously realized. Original photographs had faded beyond recognition. Documents had been misfiled or destroyed during office moves. Interview tapes had degraded to the point where they were inaudible. The comprehensive review highlighted the systematic institutional failures that had plagued the case from its beginning. Poor record-keeping practices, inadequate evidence storage facilities, and insufficient follow-up procedures had consistently undermined the investigation. Even with the best intentions and most dedicated investigators, decades of bureaucratic indifference and resource limitations had erased crucial details. But the review also revealed some previously overlooked information that had been buried in supplemental reports and never properly investigated. A witness who had been briefly interviewed in 1983 had mentioned seeing a young woman matching Tammy's description at a gas station near Cocoa Beach on the evening of her disappearance. The witness had reported that the woman seemed distressed and was trying to make a phone call from a payphone outside the station. This detail had been included in a routine canvassing report and filed away without follow-up investigation. The witness's statement had been taken by a patrol officer rather than a detective, and it had never been properly analyzed for its potential significance. By 2018, the witness had died of natural causes, and the gas station had been demolished and replaced by a shopping center. The discovery of this overlooked detail was both encouraging and frustrating for investigators. It provided the first potential sighting of Tammy after her alleged drop-off at the Glass Bank, suggesting that she had survived at least several hours longer than previously believed. But the 40-year delay in recognizing the importance of this information meant that all opportunities for follow-up investigation had been lost. Other overlooked details emerged from the comprehensive file review. A hotel clerk in Melbourne had reported a young woman matching Tammy's description checking in alone on the evening of July 6, 1983, but paying in cash and providing obviously false identification. The report had been filed but never investigated because it was located outside the immediate search area. A convenience store clerk in Titusville had reported selling cigarettes to a nervous young woman who had asked for directions to the nearest bus station. The woman had been alone, appeared frightened, and had been carrying a small suitcase. The timing and description were consistent with Tammy's case, but the report had been overlooked because it had been filed under routine incident reports rather than missing person leads. These discoveries demonstrated that opportunities to solve the case might have existed during the crucial first weeks after Tammy's disappearance, but they had been missed due to poor communication, inadequate coordination, and the overwhelming volume of information being processed by investigators. The realization that the case might have been solvable with better police work was painful for everyone involved. The 2018 review also applied modern analytical techniques to the existing evidence and witness statements. Computer programs were used to analyze timelines, map locations, and identify patterns that might have been missed during manual investigations. The analysis confirmed some existing theories while casting doubt on others, but it did not generate any breakthrough insights. In 2020, Detective Martinez made a decision that would refocus the entire investigation toward one of its most puzzling and overlooked aspects. She chose to concentrate her efforts on the 2 anonymous phone calls that had been received by Detective Lewis in the weeks following Tammy's disappearance. These calls had always intrigued investigators, but no one had ever pursued them with the intensity and resources they might have deserved. Martinez began by listening to the original recordings, which had somehow survived in the evidence room when so much other material had been lost over the decades. The audio quality was poor due to the age of the tapes and the primitive recording equipment used in 1983, but the essential content was still audible. The female voice was calm, deliberate, and mature, with no trace of distress or deception that might indicate a hoax. The caller had provided information that had not been released to the public, suggesting that she had genuine knowledge of Tammy's situation. She had mentioned specific details about Tammy's fears and behavior that only someone close to the situation would have known. The caller seemed genuinely concerned about Tammy's welfare and appeared to be providing information for legitimate reasons rather than seeking attention or causing mischief. Martinez arranged for the recordings to be digitally enhanced using modern audio processing techniques that had not been available in 1983. The enhancement revealed additional details about the caller's voice, including subtle accent patterns and speech characteristics that might help identify her geographic origin or social background. The analysis suggested that the caller was an educated woman, probably in her 40s or 50s, with possible origins in the southeastern United States. More importantly, the enhanced audio revealed background sounds that had not been audible on the original recordings. Traffic patterns, construction noise, and other environmental sounds could potentially help identify the locations from which the calls were made, even though the caller had used payphones to avoid being traced. The background audio was analyzed by specialists who could sometimes identify specific locations based on unique acoustic signatures. The investigation into the anonymous calls led Martinez to reconsider the fundamental assumptions that had guided the case for nearly 40 years. Most investigators had assumed that Tammy had been killed shortly after her disappearance, either by a serial killer like Christopher Wilder or by someone connected to drug trafficking operations she might have inadvertently discovered. But Martinez began to seriously consider the possibility that the anonymous caller had been telling the truth. Perhaps Tammy had indeed survived her initial disappearance and had gone into hiding to escape whatever dangers had been threatening her. The 1,980 seconds were a time when it was much easier for people to disappear and assume new identities than it would be in the digital age of the 21st century. Without social media, credit card databases, employment verification systems, or ubiquitous surveillance cameras, a determined person could potentially vanish completely if they were careful and had help from people willing to assist them. The anonymous caller might have been someone who was helping Tammy maintain her hidden identity while keeping her family informed that she was safe. This theory required Martinez to reconsider every aspect of the case from a completely different perspective. Instead of looking for evidence of Tammy's death, she began searching for signs that she might have lived under an assumed name. Instead of focusing on suspects who might have harmed her, she looked for people who might have helped her disappear. The investigation revealed that several organizations during the 1,980 seconds had specialized in helping people escape from dangerous situations and assume new identities. Some were legitimate witness protection programs operated by law enforcement agencies. Others were informal networks operated by religious organizations, domestic violence shelters, or other groups dedicated to helping people escape from threatening circumstances. Martinez contacted these organizations to determine whether any of them might have assisted someone matching Tammy's description during the summer of 1983. Most had maintained strict confidentiality about their operations and clients, making it difficult to obtain useful information. But some provided general guidance about their procedures and the types of cases they had handled during that period. The possibility that Tammy might have survived and lived under an assumed identity for decades was both hopeful and heartbreaking. If true, it meant that she might still be alive somewhere, possibly with a family and career of her own. But it also meant that she had been unable to contact her mother directly, even during Linda's final illness and death. Emotional implications were complex and painful to contemplate. The 40th anniversary of Tammy's disappearance on July 6, 2023, brought the largest memorial gathering in the history of the case. More than 200 people attended the candlelight vigil at Cocoa Beach, including surviving family members, childhood friends, former pageant competitors, entertainment industry colleagues, law enforcement officers who had worked the case, and complete strangers who had been touched by her story through media coverage or online communities. The event had evolved far beyond the simple memorial service that Linda Curtis had organized for the first anniversary in 1984. It had become an annual tradition that served multiple purposes: honoring Tammy's memory, supporting other families dealing with missing person cases, raising awareness about unsolved crimes and maintaining pressure on law enforcement agencies to continue their investigative efforts. The gathering featured speakers who represented different aspects of Tammy's life and the impact of her disappearance. Childhood friends shared memories of pageant competitions and teenage dreams. Former modeling colleagues talked about her professionalism and ambition. Investigators discussed the evolution of the case and their continued commitment to finding answers. Advocates for missing person families spoke about the importance of never giving up hope. The crowd was a remarkable mix of ages and backgrounds, from elderly relatives who remembered the beautiful teenager with her whole life ahead of her, to young adults who had learned about the case through podcasts, true crime websites, and social media platforms. The presence of multiple generations demonstrated that Tammy's story had transcended the original circumstances of her disappearance to become something larger and more enduring. Local media covered the anniversary extensively, generating dozens of new tips to the police department's tip line. Most were the usual mixture of mistaken sightings, false confessions, and conspiracy theories that always accompanied high-profile cases. But a few contained enough specific detail to warrant investigation, showing that public interest in the case remained strong after 4 decades. Several podcast producers and true crime content creators had dedicated entire seasons to analyzing Tammy's case, interviewing everyone still alive who had been connected to the original investigation. Their work had brought the case to international audiences, generating tips and alleged sightings from as far away as Europe, Australia, and South America. The global reach of modern media meant that Tammy's story was now known to millions of people worldwide. The anniversary also marked the launch of a new initiative by Detective Martinez and the Brevard County Sheriff's Office. They announced a partnership with genetic genealogy companies to attempt DNA analysis of any evidence that might be discovered in the future. While no biological evidence from Tammy herself was available for testing, the technology might be useful if any crime scene evidence was ever found. The genetic genealogy approach had revolutionized cold case investigations in recent years by allowing investigators to identify suspects and victims through DNA comparisons with relatives who had submitted samples to commercial genealogy databases. Even if direct matches were not available, family connections could potentially lead to identifications that would have been impossible using traditional methods. Today, Tammy Lynn Leppert remains listed in the National Missing Persons Registry, her case file updated regularly with new information and investigative developments as they occur. Her photograph, forever frozen at age 18, with the radiant smile that had won hundreds of pageant crowns, appears on websites dedicated to unsolved cases and missing persons throughout the United States and beyond. The current, age-progressed images show what she might look like at 60 years old, but investigators increasingly believe that if Tammy were still alive somewhere, she would have found a way to contact surviving family members by now. The anonymous caller's promise that she would reveal herself when ready has never been fulfilled, despite the passage of 4 decades and the deaths of everyone who might have posed a threat to her safety. Her story has become much more than a single missing person case. It serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers facing young women in the entertainment industry, a stark reminder of institutional failures in criminal investigations, and a powerful testament to a mother's unending love and determination. Linda Curtis never lived to see resolution of her daughter's case, but her memory continues to drive efforts to find answers and provide closure. Detective Martinez continues to work actively on the case, following up on new tips and applying modern investigative techniques to evidence and information that has been available for decades. She maintains regular contact with surviving family members and keeps them informed of any developments in the investigation. Her commitment to the case reflects the dedication of multiple generations of law enforcement officers who have refused to let Tammy be forgotten. The community of Cocoa Beach has permanently embraced Tammy's memory, transforming the area around the Glass Bank building into an informal memorial where visitors regularly leave flowers, candles, painted stones, and personal messages. The building itself still stands largely unchanged from 1983, its reflective surface now bearing small plaques and memorial stickers, placed by people from around the world who have been moved by her story. Local businesses throughout the area have incorporated Tammy's memory into their community involvement, participating in annual memorial events and supporting organizations dedicated to helping families of missing persons. The response demonstrates how tragic events can bring communities together and create lasting commitments to supporting those who are suffering and seeking answers. Tammy's case remains officially open and active within the Brevard County Sheriff's Office. Investigators continue to follow every credible lead and explore new theories as they develop. The FBI has offered ongoing assistance with advanced forensic techniques if any physical evidence is discovered. The reward for information leading to resolution of the case has grown to over $100,000, contributed by family members, community organizations, and anonymous donors who want to see justice served. Her legacy extends far beyond the tragedy of her personal disappearance. The institutional failures revealed by her case led to significant improvements in evidence preservation procedures and missing persons investigation protocols throughout Florida and beyond. The loss of her dental records and fingerprints sparked new requirements for maintaining identification materials for extended periods. Law enforcement agencies learned valuable lessons about the importance of coordination and communication during the critical early stages of missing person investigations. Tammy's story has also educated countless people about the warning signs of predatory behavior and the importance of trusting instincts about personal safety. Her months of fear and paranoid behavior before her disappearance serve as a reminder that such feelings often reflect real dangers rather than irrational anxieties. Young women entering the entertainment industry are now better educated about potential risks and protective strategies. The case has inspired ongoing research into the psychology of missing person cases and the impact on families who must live with unresolved questions. Linda Curtis's 12-year search for her daughter and her ultimate death without answers has become a case study in the devastating effects of ambiguous loss, the unique grief experienced by families who cannot confirm whether missing loved ones are dead or alive. But despite 4 decades of investigation, analysis, media coverage, and public attention, the central questions about Tammy's fate remain unanswered. What happened to her after Keith Roberts drove away from the Glass Bank on that hot July afternoon in 1983? Who was she afraid of during her final months of freedom? Were her fears connected to what she had witnessed in the entertainment industry, to local drug trafficking operations, or to something else entirely that has never been discovered? The truth about Tammy Lynn Leppert's disappearance remains hidden somewhere in the shadows of the past, protected by decades of silence, lost evidence, and the passage of time. But the search for answers continues with undiminished intensity, driven by the love of those who knew her, the dedication of investigators who refuse to abandon their commitment to justice, and the hope that someday, somehow, the truth will finally emerge. Her disappearance has become a symbol of all the young women who have vanished without explanation, all the families who have been forced to live with unanswered questions, and all the cases that remain unsolved, despite the best efforts of investigators and the passionate advocacy of those who refuse to let the missing be forgotten. In that sense, Tammy's story transcends her individual tragedy to become a call for justice that resonates across generations. The investigation into her disappearance continues today with the same urgency and determination that marked its beginning 40 years ago. New technologies, fresh perspectives, and evolving investigative techniques offer hope that evidence overlooked by previous generations of investigators might finally provide the breakthrough that has remained elusive for so long. Tammy Lynn Leppert vanished on July 6, 1983, but her story endures as a testament to human resilience, maternal love, and the persistence of those who seek truth in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. In the continued efforts to find her, in the annual gatherings that honor her memory, and in the determination of those who refuse to let her case be forgotten, she lives on as something more than a victim of unexplained circumstances. She has become a symbol of hope for resolution, a reminder that every missing person deserves to be found, and a call for justice that echoes across the decades. The beautiful teenager who dreamed of Hollywood stardom has achieved a different kind of immortality, one measured not in films or fame, but in the enduring commitment of those who believe that truth, justice, and closure are worth pursuing, regardless of how long the search may take. The investigation continues, the search goes on, the questions remain. But so does the hope that somewhere, in the accumulated evidence of 4 decades, in the memory of those who knew her, or in the dedication of those who continue to seek answers, the truth about Tammy Lynn Leppert waits to be discovered. Until that day comes, her story serves as both a mystery to be solved and a life to be remembered. A young woman whose disappearance changed everyone who encountered her case, and whose memory continues to inspire those who believe that no one should simply vanish without explanation. Her case stands as proof that some stories transcend their original circumstances to become something larger and more meaningful. In seeking to solve the mystery of what happened to Tammy, investigators, family members, and countless others have created a legacy of persistence, hope, and determination that honors not just her memory, but the memory of all those who have disappeared without explanation. The search for Tammy Lynn Leppert continues, and with it, the search for justice, closure, and the answers that have remained hidden for 40 years. In that ongoing search lies the true measure of her impact, not in what was lost when she disappeared, but in what has been gained through the refusal to let her story end with unanswered questions.